All right, good afternoon. I'd like to call today's Thursday, April 11th meeting of the Missoula Board of County Commissioners to order. Please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, do we have any public announcements today? Seeing none, we do have one proclamation to read, and I'll hand it off to Commissioner Slotnick.
Whereas public safety was the first service provided by a government to its citizens, and that the safety and well-being of its citizens and emergency first responders continues to be one of the foremost concerns of Missoula County, and ensuring public safety and well-being requires the ability to receive calls for help and immediately send responders to provide that help, and 911 is the critical first link in the chain in delivering public safety services, and the public safety telecommunicators who work in 911 display a superior level of commitment, dedication, and professionalism in accomplishing their mission of receiving calls for help from citizens, dispatching emergency response agencies, and maintaining a communication link with the responders to ensure their safety. And these same public safety telecommunicators provide this service to the public and first responders 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, working extraordinarily long hours with difficult schedules, and the vital role of the public safety telecommunicator is often unknown and not recognized. Therefore, we, the Board of County Commissioners, recognize the week of April 14th to the 20th as National Public Safety Telecommunications Week. And we thank the telecommunicators in 911 for all their efforts and hard work under very difficult circumstances. The community truly would not be safe without them. We also encourage the community to recognize the importance of the function of 911 and to thank these dedicated individuals in writing.
Thank you, and thanks to all of our staff in the Office of Emergency Management. Just a couple quick housekeeping items to remind folks. If you haven't done so already, coming into the room, please sign in on the sign-in sheet as you exit, just so we can keep track of everyone, and if you do testify, so we know how to spell your name for the record correctly. And also, if you have not done so already, please silence your cell phones. Our current claims list, this would be claims as of March 26, 2019 through April 3rd, 2019. Claims that is received by the Commissioner's Office total $1,204,777.92. Before we get on to our public hearings, and we have 3 today, is there any public comment on items not on today's agenda? So this would be your opportunity to comment on anything that you would like that we are not already going to discuss on the agenda. Okay, seeing none, we will roll into our first agenda item, and this is a continuation of our public hearing on the Sawmill Gulch Road petition. And I will turn it over to Steve Nide, our county surveyor, if you'd like to provide a road viewers report or anything else you'd like to add since our last meeting, Steve. It is not.
Okay, first, I'd like to apologize for being late. I have no excuse. So I'm going to just read into record the road viewers report for the Sawmill Gulch Road. Excuse me. On the date of a viewing was April 4th, 2019. In attendance, Cola Rowley, Dave Strohmeyer, Josh Slotnick, John Hart, myself, Shane Stack, Eric Dixon, Robert Taylor, Jennifer Hensick, Patrick Bridgecombe, Ben Horan, Candace Fletcher, Steve Grinnell, and John Barrett. At approximately 9 a.m., the attendees met at the parking area for the main trailhead to the Rattlesnake National Recreation Area and Wilderness and discussed the road petition and related issues. All but John Barrett traveled up the road to the intersection of Russian Joe Road. More discussion ensued, with many options being considered. It was decided to gather more information before making any recommendations or decisions. The group left the area around 9:30 a.m. Very brief, obviously, as per the report, we did not reach any decision, but we will continue to meet amongst the primary petitioners and staff and try to come up with some options that you commissioners can find palatable and the petitioners can find palatable.
Thank you, Steve. And yeah, before I reopen it for any additional public comment at this time, I would just follow on Steve's suggestion by saying that I would recommend that we as the commission today direct staff, and by this I mean Public Works, Shane, Steve Nide, County Surveyor, Deputy County Attorney John Hart, representative from our Sheriff's Office, to work with the U.S. Forest Service, the residents in Sawmill Gulch, and the city of Missoula to do exactly what Steve suggested, come up with an array of options that go from essentially no action to maybe something more significant to try to address the problems that we've identified up there. Keeping in mind that the petition before us is to designate this as a county road. So I think what certainly I would be interested in knowing is, with any option, how does it being a county road or not impact our ability to address some of the identified problems? And also I would suggest that we set a definitive date for reconvening and having those options before us. And in consultation with John Hart, he seemed to think that we could get this done by the end of May. So if there are no objections, I would say maybe May 23rd, which is a Thursday public hearing, would be an ideal opportunity to reconvene and take this up again. I would also say that and I'll let Commissioner Slotnick weigh in here also, but one of the options that I would like to have examined in consultation with the city of Missoula from a maintenance standpoint would be, what would it look like and what would the feasibility be if we did a swap of maintenance responsibilities, winter maintenance, between the city and the county, such that the city might take on all of the maintenance responsibilities in the Upper Rattlesnake for some other portion of the city that might make sense for the county to take on maintenance responsibility for. Commissioner Slotnick.
Just a few comments. So in my casual conversation with city staff, they repeatedly said, it's a new day, we're open to any conversation. So as to pass this on to Shane, they're ready to chat with you, they're open. That doesn't mean yes to any specifics, but they're open. Similarly, there's a new person in your position there, and the feeling I got was led me to a sense of optimism that they're ready to work on this with you. When directing staff to take this on, there were just a handful of real specific issues that came up in our conversation that we want to make sure, and we are on the same page on this with COLA too. We want to make sure that these, whatever options come to us beyond the do nothing sort of null option, addresses the following problems. We want to make sure appropriate signage is in place. Parking issue is dealt with. Enforcement, grading, and plowing. Irrespective of, is this become a county road or not? I understand that that's the petition and we'll make a decision on that. But whatever option we decide will absolutely answer these problems. These are the problems that need to be solved. There you go.
John, did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, the only thing I wanted to say, and you addressed it somewhat, it seems like the discussions with that we would have with the city on a maintenance swap is sort of a parallel but not entirely related discussion to the actual petition for it to be a county road. And so when I said May 23rd, and I don't want to give up on that May 23rd public meeting, we may not be able to come back by May 23rd having resolved the discussions or have some sort of proposal between the county and the city. But I think we can we can continue to have those discussions, but we may not bring back that part of the calculus on May 23rd. But I think we can address the other issues that you want us to address: signage, parking, enforcement, maintenance, along with the Forest Service, and how a county road designation advances those or doesn't advance those particular topics.
And I would say at the very least, to what extent we're able to figure this out by the 23rd, to what extent would Sawmill Gulch being a county road play into that calculus of a sort of trading of responsibilities between the city and the county? And maybe it wouldn't, maybe it would, and if so, that would at least be something to have lined out in a preliminary fashion.
Good. My sense in listening to the residents, and please correct me if I got this wrong, was that they were not so concerned that this absolutely be a county road or not. What they seemed very concerned about were that these problems are solved, and that they saw making this a county road as a way to get to solving these problems. If you all put your heads together and decide there's an easier way or a better way for whatever reason, we want to hear that. If solving these problems means making it a county road, and I personally want to hear that too. I just want to see these problems solved for the residents and for the recreators.
Clear? Okay, so this is a public hearing, continuation. Is there any public comment on the petition to make Sawmill Gulch Road a county road? Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name's Jim Costamagna.
And actually, I think it looks green. Could you just maybe bend the top of the microphone up a little bit and try that?
Is that working?
Yep, you bet. Thank you.
Not to put a pun down the road, but I've come in front of this board for 4 decades talking about county road issues. And I hear the concerns of the people who live up Sawmill Gulch of what they're facing. And you're thinking about taking it over as a county road. There's a whole bunch of things you guys know that have to come place. Number one is the county road standard. And that's been the roadblock, again, a pun, for my area where I live in Potomac since 1975. We have over 5, probably 7 miles, and you're aware of this. 7 miles of road, and probably could be 70 residents that face very similar issues. The one big difference is you, the county, own the roads, and you will not maintain them because they don't meet a county road standard. So I find this really difficult to see that you're progressing away to adopt this as a county road and not addressing a problem that's been lingering for 40 years. I would like you to think about addressing that road system along with Sawmill Gulch. There's a lot of issues revolving around it. And if you do this to Sawmill Gulch, there's going to be a whole lot more residents coming in here asking for the same services for a road system that you own but will not maintain.
Thank you, sir. Additional public comment? And sir, one follow-up question. What road do you live on?
Jordan Ranch subdivision in Potomac Valley.
Okay, thank you.
Certificate of survey I got for you if you want to look at it.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Additional public comment? Okay. Seeing none, we will keep the public hearing open. We will reconvene on May 23rd, at which point we will have an array of options presented to us by staff. So, thank you. We will move on to agenda item number 2. This is the Macaulay Acres number 2 minor subdivision. And we will begin with a staff report from Tim Worley. And actually, while we have a momentary hiatus in the meeting, I want to recognize we have a new Public Works Director in our midst, Shane Stack. Welcome, Shane.
Thank you.
You don't have to say anything. That's okay.
For the record, I'm Tim Worley with CAPS, and this is the Macaulay Acres 2 subdivision, a minor subdivision proposal by TITEM LLC in the Target Range neighborhood. The proposal is for 5 lots on about 5.5 acres, served by a new 24-foot wide roadway along the eastern edge of the subdivision. This is an aerial photo showing about 3/4 of an acre in cultivated agriculture in the center of the lot with hayland around it and a home on the northwestern portion of the property dating back to approximately the early 1950s. This parcel is zoned Target Range West End rural zoning, which has a 1 acre minimum lot size. This district allows residential uses as well as residential accessory uses in buildings, agriculture, and daycare homes. Prior to the 2005 zoning of this property as Target Range West End, it was zoned CRR1, which allowed for 1 home per acre. So it's essentially been zoned for in excess of 40 years. We reviewed this project against the Missoula County Growth Policy, as well as the Target Range Neighborhood Plan and the Fort Missoula Plan. We note that some of the objectives of the growth policy are to protect and enhance rural character, to maintain a clear distinction between rural and urban areas, and to guide new subdivisions to areas that have the least impact on natural resources and are the most suited for development. This subdivision, we note, is located within the urban area and the Metropolitan Planning Organization boundaries. And of course, it's within the Target Range Plan area, and the location is recommended for residential uses at a density of 1 home per acre. Interestingly, prior to the adoption of the Target Range Plan, all of Western Target Range was recommended for 2 homes per acre. That was actually reduced to 1 home per acre in the area of the subdivision, right here. And again, this subdivision amounts to about a 1 home per acre subdivision, 1 home or 5 homes on 5.57 acres. So we reviewed this subdivision, of course, against the subdivision review criteria, including impacts to agriculture, agricultural water user facilities, local services, impacts to the environment, wildlife habitat, and public health and safety. And we knew that agriculture would be a prominent review criterion with this subdivision. So we dug deep into state law, our subdivision regulations, and we reviewed all of this through the lens of our growth policy. This subdivision must reasonably mitigate potentially adverse impacts to agriculture and agricultural water user facilities, as well as the rest of the review criteria. There's one goal that we focused in on regarding the growth policy, which is the identification of priority resource areas by land use designation maps and zoning. So that covers things like soils, wildlife habitat, scenic view sheds, and functions of the natural environment. So in other words, the growth policy is used to inform land use mapping, both when you're talking about neighborhood plans and zoning, and land use mapping informs our review of resources. We do note that this is prime farmland if irrigated. It's a parcel that has an irrigation lateral that runs along the western edge of the parcel and an irrigation ditch out front. Irrigation will be facilitated through the property following subdivision and can be utilized on the property following subdivision with the implementation of risers and culverting that ditch. We also note that there's a purpose and intent section in the subdivision regulations with regard to agriculture, which speaks to maintaining a balance between the interests of landowners and the community's collective interests. It also cites to maintaining a balance between functional agriculture, with the need to accommodate residential growth and development. And there's another purpose and intent statement that speaks to supporting voluntary efforts to protect agricultural lands. In this location, we noted that conservation opportunities aren't really precluded with this subdivision. It's just 5.5 acres. But by contrast, if you look at, whoops, let me go back here. This subdivision here, Miners Edition, which went through review in 2006, because there was such a large land holding that included Macaulay Butte, that was a great opportunity to secure a conservation easement, and that's what you see on the top of Macaulay Butte at this time. We don't see similar conservation opportunities with this particular parcel, mainly because of its size. So impacts to wildlife and wildlife habitat were reviewed. We note that Target Range is a known pass-through area for wildlife, as well as having significant resident wildlife. FWP reviewed the subdivision, and their recommendation was for information for the covenants on living with wildlife. So we note in support of this subdivision, we felt that community infrastructure was a major component in staff support of the subdivision. I'd like to outline what some of those community infrastructure elements are. They include access to schools, with Target Range School just being a 1/4 mile to the east. Big Sky High is about 1.5 miles to the east on South Ave. We've got 2 significant parks, Big Sky Park and Fort Missoula Regional Park being within 1.2 miles. The Little League ball fields are under 2 miles from this subdivision. And then DNRC lands, which are often used for recreation, are within 2.5 miles. And then some city open space, actually, the Tower Street open space is about 2.6 miles from this location. We also have a couple prominent pathways, non-motorized pathways, the South Avenue pathway running along the northern edge of the subdivision, which accesses the Clements pathway on the western edge of Clements, not far from Target Range School. So there's a number of community assets we felt were important to note in support of this residential subdivision proposal. It's on a collector road. It has access to multiple pedestrian paths. There was a public easement actually platted with the original Macaulay Acres subdivision in 1963 that anticipated a through connection here. We've got Fort Missoula Regional Park, just 1.2 miles to the east, community hospital, shopping, and benefiting from access and the aesthetics of nearby Macaulay Butte without degrading in any way the Butte. So some recommended conditions. We're recommending a revegetation plan for disturbed sites. That's a fairly typical recommendation. We're also recommending a plan for ongoing weed management, and that must be placed in the covenants or in a development agreement. There needs to be a notice of agricultural activities in the covenants, and that basically says you're in an agricultural area, expect to deal with noise, smells, etc., associated with agriculture. Also, any impacts to the irrigation ditch must be reviewed by Missoula Irrigation District. That includes the enclosing of the irrigation lateral in a culvert, the dry laid sewer line, etc. There must be covenant information about surface irrigation limits per lot. That's basically a DNRC requirement. We're recommending Missoula Rural review residential fire sprinklers. There needs to be establishment of a no parking zone for the 24-foot wide roadway along the eastern edge of the subdivision. And as I mentioned before, living with wildlife information needs to be contained within the covenants. There's also a condition about either removal of the house prior to final plat approval, or it needs to be shown as zoning compliant. In conclusion, staff recommends approval of Macaulay Acres to subdivision.
Thank you, Tim. Would the applicant's representative like to make any comments?
Good afternoon, County Commissioners. For the record, Dale McCormick with PCI, representing TITAM LLC. I want to thank Casey, who isn't here today, who did a lot of the work on the project, and Tim for their work on the staff report, and also just really good communication throughout the process, especially at the end. So we are in concurrence with staff's recommended conditions of approval, and we'd request your approval of the subdivision, subject to staff's recommended conditions, and I'm happy to answer questions that you might have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for either Tim or Dale at this time? Yes.
Could you share what the planning board had to say?
Being a minor subdivision, this just comes to you.
Okay, this is a public hearing. Is there any public comment on the proposed Macaulay Acres number 2 minor subdivision? Don't be shy. Okay, I knew there was someone out there.
Good afternoon. I'm Bonnie Buckingham with the Community Food and Agriculture Coalition, and we submitted written comment, and I just wanted to point out a couple points in there regarding this property. It is, as staff said, on prime if irrigated soil. It is only 5 acres, which in the grand scheme of things seems small, but the last 5 acres and the next 10 acres are going to come back and say the same thing and say, it's only 5 acres. It doesn't really matter that much. It's in the middle of residential. That kind of epitomizes target range. And we don't want to just slowly keep plucking away at our agricultural land to the point that we lose it. So we have recommended denial of this subdivision. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Additional public comment?
Hi, Jim Cusker from Grass Valley. I'm also a committee member of the Land Use Committee for CFAC. And as Bonnie just stated, we took a very careful look at this particular subdivision. And I have some things that I would certainly like to point out to you that bother me a great deal. The very first of these is the fact that this subdivision is categorized as a minor subdivision. A minor subdivision is one that doesn't have to have planning board review, as you know. Now, if this particular 5-some acres were located on a rocky hillside, I would suggest that I wouldn't be standing up here objecting to it. Instead, it's on well over 5 acres of prime ag land, prime soil, the best in the county, the best in the nation, the best in the world. And there's very little of it there. This is not a rocky hillside. This is a valuable resource that we need to protect. As is pointed out in the executive summary, every subdivision proposed on agricultural land must be reviewed to mitigate the effects on agriculture. And I would suggest that by bypassing the planning board, an important part of the vetting of this was bypassed, it was omitted. And I think that's extremely unfortunate. There are several things that I would like to call to your attention on the executive summary concerning agriculture. Number 5 under the agricultural section. No food production is currently occurring on this site. Yeah, well, that's true. Historically, it was part of a much larger site, but even as a 5-acre spot, the amount of food that can be produced on 5 acres with the with the resource, the prime soil there, and the availability of all the water that you'd want to use. That water started flowing by there in the 1890s. So we have a very, very unique resource. Yes, not devoted for food production at this particular time, but as all of us who live on the land know, there's a heck of a lot of food you can grow on 5 acres. Number 8, the Target Range Plan confirms that the neighborhood is made up of prime soil. Yes, one of the largest areas of prime soil, if irrigated, in the county. Yes, yes. Now, it was mentioned in the summary that, but it's isolated. It's sitting off by itself. It's not contiguous with others. All you need to do is drive down Reserve Street and take a look at Benston's farm. Not very big. Take a look at the productivity that comes off from that. Is it isolated from other agricultural units? Of course. Is it still a valuable resource producing a lot of food? Absolutely. Are we willing to give up yet a 5 acre here, a 5 acre there? And pretty soon, Target Range is no longer rural residential with small agriculture. Instead, it's just like every other place, with this all-important resource covered up and going to be unproductive, of course, forever. Number 17, the area in commercial style agriculture appears to be about 0.75 acres. The remainder of the lot appears to be a combination of residential use and grass hay. Yeah, that's right now. That's not what it was, and that's not what its potential is. But it sure as heck will be if you cover it with houses. I think that in the application itself, the suggestion was made saying that this application suggests that each of the proposed lots will have access to irrigation water for their gardens, and thus does not create significant adverse impacts to agriculture to mitigate. Would certainly like to remind you, as you well know, that the present definition of agriculture, both in our Missoula County growth policy and the subdivision review regulations, includes this statement: agriculture does not include gardening for personal use. So how can you say, how can you even suggest that since the landowners on these 1 acre lots take the place of this 5 acre plot, when the very definitions that the county goes by says that doesn't count, folks. That simply doesn't count. Now, in fact, it'll be just 1 week from today, won't it? In which we'll all be back in here listening to and hearing the final pitch for the land use mapping and element project. I've been following that very carefully, and I've been extremely pleased with the way that this particular project has been going and the recommendations that are coming forth. I understand, and this was presented by Andrew at the Open Lands Committee within the past month, when he was giving that group a rundown, a synopsis of the project. And he pointed out that the Target Range folks had requested that the land use designation for Target Range be changed from rural residential to rural residential and small agriculture. Okay? Now, when we say small agriculture, what size are we talking about? This particular subjection of the subdivision to the minor subdivision review status kind of wipes out, as I mentioned before, one of the key vetting steps when we take a look at the impact on agriculture. So my recommendation to you, my hope to you, would be that at least for the time being, you don't approve this. You don't approve this. It doesn't mitigate for the loss of agriculture. I don't care if it's a little bit isolated. Hey, it's not very far from the first McCully Butte project that was proposed. It's right next door to it. That's still open space. But what difference does it make if you have in Missoula County highly productive chunks of agriculture here and here and here and here? They don't have to be connected. They're still productive. And they certainly keep not only the productivity up, but they also maintain a way of life. You can work, I don't care how long you want to work during the day, but on 5 acres during the summertime, whoa, you can put in a lot of work there. And the productivity that comes out of it is truly, truly awesome. So if you don't deny it outright today, I hope you at least delay it. Delay it until it has a chance to be vetted more thoroughly. Send it to planning board. Send it to planning board. And let's take a look at what Andrew and his conscientious staff suggest next week. And how does this fit into the plans for the future of agriculture? So that's my plea. Please don't approve this today. Let's vet it thoroughly. And it would certainly appear that the growth policy is going to be drastically changed once the land use map and elements are put in place. And would be ashamed to sacrifice this vital, irreplaceable resource right now. Let's at least wait on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Additional public comment?
Good afternoon. My name is Fred Stewart. I'm a member of the Target Range Homeowners Board, and this particular area is within the area that I represent. I also was caught off guard by the fact that this proposal did not come through the planning board. That's usually where I watch for these subdivisions to come through. So I think there's a benefit, even though it's a minor subdivision, when there are significant resources being considered. I think it would be helpful to have it come through the planning board first. I'll try not to ramble too much. The primary criteria that was listed on page 5, number 1, subdivisions are required to reasonably mitigate potentially significant adverse impacts to agriculture and agricultural water use facilities resulting from the subdivision. I don't see any mitigation here at all. None. In the findings, in the conclusions of law, the approval of the subdivision would not preclude the important benefits associated with guiding principle of agriculture and the growth policy. I can't see how it doesn't preclude when every bit of land is going to become part of a residential lot. And as Jim Cusker just mentioned, the fact that you can have a garden doesn't really address the agriculture component in the growth policy, in my opinion. In the Target Range Neighborhood Plan, we identified a number of very important resources that we considered to be at risk. Agriculture was one of the primary ones, and we pointed out the importance of addressing those resources. In the zoning for this particular area, the Target Range West End Rural Zoning District, we have a one-lot minimum size. But in the Target Range Neighborhood Plan, a recommendation was made to allow for a change in that one-lot minimum size when there were significant resources that could be protected by allowing a different configuration. Now, that zoning that's part of the Target Range Neighborhood Plan has never been approved by the county commissioners. We've been here a number of times asking for that to be taken care of. It was always put off because there were other things that had higher priority within the planning shop. And Tim can tell you that he made a recommendation once that in order to get those zoning changes taken care of in the neighborhood plan, it was going to take approximately 62 hours of staff time. It's never happened yet. The reason that I bring it up, among other things, other than whining about the fact that it's now 9 years and it hasn't been taken care of, this particular parcel is an ideal candidate for why we made that wording change, not just for the Target Range West End Rural Zoning District, but for all of the Target Range area that's included in the neighborhood plan. And here it is, that by using conservation design, it would be very possible on this particular parcel to protect half of the acreage of this prime ag land, to protect half of it and keep it in potential agricultural use while still providing 5 lots. So it would meet the growth needs for residential use, and it would allow protection of a significant portion of that parcel for ag land. And preservation of agriculture land is one of those important resources. So it would be relatively easy to set up the configuration such that there would be half-acre parcels for the residences and keep half of the area at least open for ag. That way we can meet both the growth needs as well as the needs for protecting agriculture. And it's interesting that in looking at the amount of land that can be irrigated from a well, it's restricted at 6/10 of an acre. Well, so if it were 5/10 of an acre parcel, then indeed the residents could use their well to water their lawn or their lot without having to worry about going over the limit on that. So that's mainly what I wanted to say, and I'm sorry that I didn't have an opportunity to get it in writing, not being aware until today that we were going to be covering this on this hearing. Another kind of wild card I'd just like to throw out there. When the miners subdivision was approved, and there was some reference to that earlier today, they did a transfer of development rights from the floodplain to the to the east side of Macaulay Butte, so that they were able to propose 129 units on 19 acres by transferring those development rights. And the owner of the property owned both the floodplain and Macaulay Butte. For future consideration, and even for this one, I'm wondering about the possibility where we have a single property owner, in this case owning both Macaulay Meadows 2 and the Macaulay Meadows proposed area. Would it be possible to transfer agricultural protection from one parcel over to another parcel? Because there's prime ag land on both of those parcels. So what I'm suggesting would be, for example, half of this parcel could be protected by saying that 2.5 acres of Macaulay Meadows would be put into a permanent agricultural protection in addition to the agricultural protection that would be part of that subdivision. So similar to transferring development rights, it would be transferring agricultural protection. I realize nothing like that exists at this point in time. It seems that it would be a way for the property owner to show a very strong good faith effort to protect agriculture, still maintain development of this parcel, possibly, while increasing the amount of ag land that would be on the other parcel. Too many details about how to make that actually work. So my recommendation for this proposal would be that you deny it until you actually see some protection for prime agricultural land. It's not here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Additional public comment? Going once, going twice. Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing and questions or comments from the commission. Commissioner Slotnick.
Thanks, Dave. Tim, a question for you, and this is a process question. Can we ask the planning board to wrestle with this?
Being a minor subdivision, it can only come to you. It can't be routed through the planning board.
We can't ask them to take this on.
No.
So by way of a follow-up, what sort of deadlines are associated with this particular subdivision?
Today is the 35-day deadline for the subdivision.
Meaning today, a decision needs to be made.
Yes.
Okay. Additional? Mr. McCormick, Dale, do you want to come up here, if you could, just for a second? Okay. So, Dale, what, if any, we've heard a few folks mention that there appears to be no mitigations, agricultural mitigations offered for this subdivision. Could you elaborate on that? Have any mitigations been offered?
So our perspective on it is that the growth policy talks about 1 acre development. The zoning reflects the growth policy as far as 1 acre minimum lot size. And by the time you put a house and a septic system and a drain field and still have area for potentially garden on the lot, there isn't really the opportunity to do any additional mitigation. So the answer to that question is the mitigation is through the zoning that was adopted for that area.
Okay, by way of a follow-up, and you guys can, Tim and Dale, if you want to tag team this, our last speaker mentioned the idea of, I guess what you'd call a creative means of mitigation by way of transferring development or, I guess, development rights or agricultural protection. Thoughts on that? Is that even feasible? It may not be desirable from the applicant standpoint, but given the fact that opportunities for mitigation have been somewhat limited on this parcel, might that be a creative means of mitigating impacts on prime agricultural soils?
Just piggyback on that.
Sure, go ahead.
It seems that there's an unusual circumstance here in that we have the same landowner and 2 parcels, and maybe combining uses between the two in terms of development and agriculture might yield a solution in terms of mitigating for the impacts of development that otherwise wouldn't be available if all there was were this 5 acres.
Yeah, I think transfer of development rights is one of the best, if not the best solution to how to fairly sort out this issue. And I've expressed that to the commissioners for the last 10 years, that that's a tool that other communities use. It's hard to figure out where you have sending and receiving areas and the logistics of that and how you have a bank of ownership and the mechanics of making that happen. But I think that's, obviously I can't speak for the owners of properties, but the problem at the end of the day is still going to be the 1 acre minimum zoning, because any attempt at clustering would require a smaller than 1 acre lot size, which currently is not an option available.
It's clearly not an option available for this particular parcel before us today, but how about the other parcel that was mentioned? As
Not available for that one either.
Tim, do you have thoughts on this?
I guess my my gut reaction is that if there were some vetting of this, it does feel like a transfer of development rights, and there's different ways of doing that on a kind of ad hoc basis. I don't know that we know enough information now to make it successful. I think the Macaulay Meadows parcel is a single parcel, so securing like a 2.5 acre portion of that, I'm not sure how you would do that necessarily and make it its own lot. I mean, maybe an agricultural exemption would be a means of doing that. But again, the logistics of, I would say it would be best to vet the logistics of something like that.
Josh?
So just from on a process standpoint, if we were to ask you to get creative here, do you think that there something like what you're describing is possible, given zoning, et cetera, and the processes as they are, what they are? Given that we can tell there's a sentiment among the BCC at the moment for some creativity that maybe not had existed in the previous 9 years.
Yeah, and I'm kind of thinking out loud on the whole ag covenant.
And I get we're putting you on the spot too, and I apologize for that.
I mean, that's probably the best thing you could do. I mean, you could create a fee simple lot that way that could be used for agriculture. Now, some of the logistics of making that happen and making it, that has its own agricultural water, that other parcel. So making it viable as far as access to irrigation, those are all things that I think could use a little bit more analysis. But I mean, it's theoretically possible, certainly.
An analysis that would require the cooperation of the applicant or property owner, obviously, to grant an extension, should that be desired. We'll come back to you just a second. Thanks, Dale. Don't go too far. Mr. Stewart, did you have something you wanted to come on up if you wanted to clarify what it is that you were suggesting?
I was personally quite involved in the zoning writing for the West End Rural Zoning District. And the reason for the 1 acre minimum lot size was to try to avoid some of the situations that were occurring in the target range area where parcels were residences were being pushed close together, and then they'd come back for a second bite 5 years later and want to fill in some more area, and you end up with a density higher than what they started out trying to have. So the wording that we put in the purpose section of the Target Range West End Rural Zoning District was, the district is being expressly created to perpetuate these characteristics and its rural design to prevent overcrowding. Planned unit developments, planned variations, and cluster developments are neither encouraged nor deemed necessary to meet the intent of this district. Our understanding at the time was that we could not prohibit those things, but because state law had something to say about that, but that we could, in the intent section of the zoning, talk about what the purpose of, what we were trying to do. Well, things have evolved and have changed, and as a result of the neighborhood plan, the reason for the wording in the neighborhood plan that directly modifies that particular statement is to allow for conservation design, which some people call clustering, as a way to protect agriculture, the view shed, the water, a number of resources at risk. So while I would disagree a little bit with Dale that we're locked into 1 acre minimum lot size with the zoning, I think that the community, I'm guessing, my sense is that the community would support a deviation from the minimum lot size if indeed it was to protect some of these resources at risk, which would include prime agricultural lands. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for some creativity that doesn't violate the zoning, really, and addresses the neighborhood plan in terms of what those objectives were. So,
And yeah, I get it that the vision of many in the community might be somewhat at odds with the wording of the zoning. It seems like the problem that we're facing is the zoning might be needing to have the dust blown off of it that would explicitly allow the sort of clustering that I think is a community value. The problem is where we are right today is the zoning is going to trump the other planning documents, I believe.
but excuse me, but I'm suggesting that the zoning as worded does not preclude smaller than 1 acre lot size. In those cases, it would drop back to a density formula instead of a minimum lot size formula in those cases where I think the community would be okay with resource protection. And I mean, we said in the zoning that these things are not encouraged or deemed necessary to meet the intent of the district. That doesn't mean it's prohibited. I mean, John Hart could tell us whether I'm speaking out of line on this or not, but I don't see it as going necessarily against the zoning.
Okay, thanks, Fred.
Okay.
Tim, I didn't want to speak out of turn.
No, and maybe this is your question. I'd like to hear from either Tim or John Hart specifically on the zoning question, whether what we're looking at is a hard and fast minimum 1 acre lot size.
Or is this a density question as opposed to a number of lot size, as a lot size question?
In our administration of the Target Range West End since 2005, we have read that 1 acre as inviolable, for lack of a better word, that you can't go back to a density-based zoning. Now, Fred's correct in that we've had conversations about, as you would say, blowing the dust off the Target Range West End to make it more density-based within the larger context of looking at the neighborhood and potentially even downzoning certain areas. But we've always seen Target Range West End as a 1 acre minimum lot size. That's an absolute.
John?
I don't have anything to say except we just had the Macaulay Meadows subdivision come in front of us, and there was significant objection to many aspects of that subdivision, including lot size less than 1 acre.
Tim?
If I could just clarify with that one, they actually went through a plan variation process to get down to sub 1 acre. So they sort of went through a formal means of getting down to less than 1 acre.
Can you bring up on a map where these two parcels are in relation to each other?
And while you're doing that, Jamie, did you have something you wanted to add? No. Oh, yes.
I was just going to clarify that
Do you want to come on up to the mic, please?
Jamie Robacher with County Planning. I was just going to clarify that that subdivision had gone through the plan variation process, and that is a rezoning process, which allows them to reduce the minimum lot size by 50% or up to 50%. So just wanted to clarify that.
And would that process be available in this case?
Yes, it could be.
If they requested rezoning,
requested a rezoning,
which they have not. Thank you.
which they did not.
So I've highlighted Macaulay Meadows, parent parcel, on Macaulay Butte, and then here's nearby Macaulay Acres 2.
Josh, did you have a
And
question?
what's the situation in terms of development on the first parcel, as this predates me?
This one went through a residential subdivision application in 2018, and that was denied.
Denied.
Dale.
Dale McCormick with PCI. I just wanted to put it out there that our office is very interested in doing conservation subdivision. I'm personally interested in it, and our office has a history of doing that kind of work. The Miners Addition project to the east was done by our office, and that's really the only transfer of development rights project that I've been part of. And the Macaulay Meadows subdivision was an attempt at clustering, but required a reduction in lot size. And we were unsuccessful in that. So I just wanted to paint that bigger picture of what our goals at PCI are too. And we'd like to see this, but it's hard to figure out how to, when you are creative about land development, how to be successful at that, given the current environment.
So I just want to ask this kind of open question and share my opinion a little bit and kind of where I am with this. So I'm very moved by what Mr. Cusker has to say, and from my background as a family farmer, I'm aware of the preciousness of prime irrigated soil. I'm also aware that on 5 acres, if you do development in an attempt to mitigate for that development, you're not leaving the 5 acres, we're leaving like 2.5 acres, which isn't very much land. And also, we can do this death to local agriculture by 1,000 cuts by 2.5 acres, 5 acres here, et cetera. And it's a heart-wrenching kind of no-win situation. And if we were looking at much larger than this, I would absolutely 100% say, no way can we do 1 per acre. We have to do something else. On a chunk this small, it's harder for me to say that. However, given that the same landowner has land in proximity, I'm asking you, can you see, and I know, and maybe the answer is I can't tell you right now. That's okay. But is there a way where we could combine resources on these 2 pieces of land and preserve a certain amount of development and preserve a certain amount of agriculture, given that we have 2 chunks of earth to work with here, not just this 5 acres?
I would say not at this time. I mean, the owner isn't here. Alan McCormick is here, and he may have something to say in that respect, but I would say not at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. I would hate to not give you the opportunity to respond to that tantalizing offer, Alan. Anything you'd like to offer?
You're going to give me the floor? You know, my mother's family has been farming the same piece of property since the 1700s. My great uncle is Cyrus Hall McCormick, who developed the Reaper and went on to create the McCormick Tractor Company. Apparently, my branch of that family decided that was, the horse was never going to go away, so we didn't participate in the tractor fund. I tell you that to tell you that sparked my interest in my first degrees in horticulture, which sparked an interest in land use planning and preservation of agriculture. My second degree is in land use planning. I have a master's in planning from Virginia Tech, and my major paper for that was on an innovative technique for agricultural zoning, for preservation of agricultural lands using an innovative technique for zoning in Clark County, Virginia. It's a fascinating study of how they mapped every parcel and assigned development rights, and ultimately my conclusion on why that worked in Clark County, Virginia, which is a tiny county on the west side of the mountains from DC and the burgeoning development, is political will. That's why that agricultural zoning survived and worked, because they had the political will to enforce it. And so I have an interest, just like Dale, in conservation techniques and preservation techniques and agricultural soils and the like. And then we put it on the ground, and we have to serve 15 masters. We tried the plan variation route for Macaulay Acres to allow the lot sizes to be shrunk in order to provide at least a 2.5 acre chunk, and the neighbors came unglued. And I understand what Mr. Stewart's saying, and his reading of the zoning regulations is correct in sort of that they suggest that we need to do more to create these techniques. But 1 acre lot sizes are sacred out there. And is that best for preservation of the resources? Absolutely not. And certainly people will tell you that there were other problems that planners and yourselves found with the Macaulay Acres subdivision, but that trying to go below 1 acre was a huge problem. And the zoning doesn't allow it. And so we are in a real bind of trying to say, how do we serve all of these masters and get something that can be accommodated, that can be approved and the like. And I look at this the same way Dale looks at this, where you have a growth policy, you have a neighborhood plan, and you have a zoning, and all of which have analyzed the agricultural issue and come to the conclusion that 1 acre parcels are appropriate. So you made the decision as a government going through all of those processes that land out here can be developed in 1 acre chunks. Maybe that wasn't the right conclusion, but that is what the conclusion is. And that's why Dale's company has devised a subdivision that meets your zoning, meets your growth policy, meets your target range neighborhood plan, and hopefully doesn't anger the neighbors because you're trying to do something that goes less than 1 acre. And you'll recall this Macaulay Acres also had 2 cul-de-sacs. Those cul-de-sacs were trying to accommodate the neighbor's interest in not having more traffic as a through road. So what do you do then? So the techniques that you're suggesting are appropriate. They're not built into the zoning right now, so you do need to dust off the zoning and change them. And then you need the political will when the people say, hey, 1 acre lots are sacred out here, you can't go less than 1 acre. The political will has to say, we hear you, but the agricultural resources that we want to protect, give the landowner a reasonable return on their investment into their property, protect resources. You're going to have to maybe set aside your sacredness for your 1 acre lot. So I know that's a long-winded explanation of not answering your question, but I want to give you more background about where Dale's company and our client are all coming from, and the interests and desires are running in a head-on collision to your current zoning regulations and neighborhood desires and wills that don't always align with what Mr. Stewart's saying, although he's got a better handle on certainly the planning aspects than anybody.
So thanks a lot. That was good information, and I appreciate what you have to say, and I think you did nail it with political will. My only disagreement with you is when that zoning and neighborhood planning was done and they arrived, they at that time came up with 1 per acre. I don't believe that was done with agricultural and culture in mind. I think that was done with the culture of the neighborhood in mind. If they did think about agriculture, it wasn't in an appropriate or realistic way. I believe it was done to maintain a certain way of life in that neighborhood. But I certainly agree with you on the political will question, and I appreciate your previous efforts towards smaller than 1 acre and on those cul-de-sacs and thinking about the neighborhood, et cetera.
Yeah, that neighborhood planning document has great agricultural mapping. It's got the soils mapping. And it has discussions about what do you do with that, and it comes to the conclusion that the zoning remains appropriate. And so it's curious to have seen that, but then that's what these guys are faced with. So then they come in and say, how do we make the lot smaller? Try a plan variation, and that runs headlong into other problems.
Yeah, admittedly, this is a bind.
Yes. I appreciate you allowing me the indulgence.
Thanks for the info.
Telling you way more information than you needed.
Thank you. And Dale, did I hear you right that one of your relatives invented the Grim Reaper? Is that
the Reaper?
No, that's,
just joke. Sorry. Never mind.
Yeah, you might. Oddly enough, that the farm that my family had was a Walnut Grove, was the name of the farm where the Reaper was invented, which is now a Virginia Tech agricultural research station, and so which is my alma mater. So it's come to a nice full circle.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm feeling fairly stuck here in that allowing the landowner to realize what their sort of predicted return on investment in number of houses that the zoning would allow, and mitigating for that damage to the agricultural resource seem impossible on this small of a chunk of land. Yet, given there's a nearby chunk of land owned by the same person, I believe there might be a solution here. And I'm hearing that, sure, there's a solution as possible, but you're going to run headlong into the freight train of public sentiment, and it won't be easy.
Tim, could you pull up the suggested motion, please? Yeah, I agree entirely. This is an incredibly frustrating scenario that I think all parties are faced with here. Certainly, there is the classic death by 1,000 cuts when it comes to preserving agricultural lands. We are saddled with zoning that is perhaps out of sync with our forthcoming land use map and community recognition that agriculture might necessitate instances where lot sizes are smaller than 1 acre. We're also faced with the all too frequent frustration of being up against the deadline where we have to make a decision today, and there really does not seem to be an opportunity to either send it to the planning board for more vetting or simply prolong our own deliberations on the matter. Tim?
I don't actually have a motion in the slideshow, but it's actually at the top of page 16, or I can hand you my staff report, whichever.
We have it in our
useful.
Read out loud the part that is you're referencing or finding
Sure,
interesting.
yeah. That the Macaulay Acres number 2 subdivision be approved based on the findings of fact and conclusions of law in the staff report, and subject to the recommended conditions of approval in the staff report.
Yeah, it's a difficult situation to be in. Any additional thoughts, Commissioner Slotnick?
So, Tim, do you see any way to make use of the fact that we have 2 chunks of land owned by the same person in relative close proximity that we could combine such that we provide the landowner with the ability to achieve the amount of houses he was hoping for and preserve land, even if this means running into the anger of nearby neighbors?
I really think you need the landowner here because you need to get his express preference for mitigation of impacts. So if you impose something new that's not been introduced thus far in the public process, you probably need to hear from him about his reaction to that imposition of something of that degree.
How do we do that process-wise?
Well, you could ask for an extension of the 35-day period to a date certain. That'd probably be the best thing that you can do.
Well,
at
without
this
going
point.
through the act of emotion, what I'm tossing out there as an idea is to ask for just that, and then ask the landowner and Dale to get together and see if they could use these 2 resources to be creative, so we can simultaneously meet both these goals of providing the landowner the ability to achieve a return on his investment based on the amount of houses he was expecting to build, and save some of this land. Understanding, as you pointed out, that we're going to run headlong into the freight train of neighborhood anger. And you mentioned political will. I'm ready to have that fight, though I do not relish it.
Dale or Alan, any response to that?
Again, I don't think at this time that discussion can happen, and I'm not able to to grant an extension of the review period. But I think that further discussion after a decision is made is entirely possible. So.
Okay. Thank you.
So just clear, that was a no, right?
That would be a no. Yeah,
I just
go
want to
ahead.
ask you one other question. And I say this with all respect, and when we met at our meeting last week, and I apologize for this, but really because this predates me, I was unaware that the same landowner owned land nearby and that there was, at least on paper, the potential for something creative, or I would have brought it up then, but I did not know that. And I feel bad putting you on the spot now. Given that, when you say, no, there's no way we can have this conversation with the landowner, why not?
Not at this time.
Why not? Is he dead set on this? It's all or nothing here? Or I'm just curious.
Or is it that he's just not here?
He's not here, and I believe, and I would encourage you to watch the minutes from the meetings for Macaulay Meadows.
I will.
But I think my sense, and Alan, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but he is expecting a decision on this subdivision today, and not to kick the can down the road. So I don't think I'm speaking for him, but I feel confident that he would not be willing to grant an extension.
Thank you. All right. I would entertain a motion. Well, in the spirit of kicking things off and breaking the ice, I'll go ahead and make the motion. I would move that the Macaulay Acres No. 2 subdivision be approved based on the findings of fact and conclusions of law in the staff report and subject to the recommended conditions of approval in the staff report. Again, I sympathize with all parties on this. This is a frustrating place to be. Folks should know I am not shy from offering a denial if I feel like the preponderance of the evidence is warranted. In this case, I just can't quite say with confidence that is that's a decision that I could confidently defend. It is a smaller parcel of land that we're dealing with here, which is not to say that it is not still obviously incrementally a loss of prime agricultural soils, which makes a difference as we are facing an era of climate change and needing to be adaptable. I guess another aspect of this, as I'm looking at the aerial photo in front of us, even though we're talking about an open parcel of land with the exception of one residence, it's not in what's being proposed is not entirely out of keeping with what is right across the street, which is only one factor, obviously. But our options seem to be pretty limited in that we have no additional time for deliberation. We don't have any offer of willingness on the part of the applicant to who's not here, to look at anything more broad-reaching in terms of taking into account other properties. So as much as I hate to say it, I'm supportive of approval today.
What happens if we're deadlocked without a third?
It fails. We don't have a second yet, so we need a second for a vote to occur. And I took the liberty to debate without having the second on the floor, but it's okay.
Can I ask Dale another question?
Come on up, Dale. And I would say if we do, if the motion before us does die, it would probably behoove us to have a strong set of findings of fact and conclusions of law to support that. Go ahead.
If this were to die today, could you imagine a situation where you and the landowner would consider the fact that you have these two parcels and come up with something creative as a way to mitigate the loss?
Were to be denied today?
Yeah. Would you come back with a new thing, or would you just keep fighting on this thing?
I can't even speak to that.
All right. I
hypothetical
just trying.
Yeah.
All right.
I think that if you look at how the Macaulay Meadows process went, you'll understand that there was a sincere willingness on the part of the applicant to take the risk that wasn't a necessary risk to create a working farm, and it was not successful. So I'll just leave it at that.
Commissioner Stockmeyer, if it helps you at all, I can sense your struggle.
Did you say
right now.
Commissioner
You combined
Slotmeyer?
us. You combined us.
Did I?
It was just shorthand.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I apologize. I would caution you from leveraging one piece of land against an entirely different piece of land under the circumstances. I can't necessarily articulate a legal basis why that is concerning to me, but it just doesn't feel right under the circumstances here. And then secondly, it's just like Commissioner Strohmeyer said, if there's a denial of this subdivision and there's a challenge to that denial, there would need to be a very robust set of findings of facts in support of the reason for the denial. And for many of the things we've discussed here today, those findings may not be robust enough in this particular situation.
Thanks. So where I'm stuck here is on the size of this piece of land, that mitigation relegates the amount left for agriculture to be so small as to not be as worthwhile as it could be. So I'm going to very much in a broken-hearted way vote with my colleague and say as hyper clearly as I can to you development and realtor lobbies out there, please do never ever bring before me a piece of land much larger than this and say 1 per acre. It is not mitigating for the loss of ag land to development. It is in itself lost. So please do conservation design or don't bring it. Thank you.
Do you have a second? Okay, motion and a second. Yeah, and I think this is ought to be inspiration for us as part of the governing body in the community to, once we adopt what I think is going to be a pretty progressive land use map here in the near future, that we immediately roll into the discussion of zoning, and that zoning be equally creative in terms of addressing community values like protection of agriculture.
So you mentioned political will. When we enter this zoning process, we absolutely have the political will to do this type of zoning. There will be ag land protection in the zoning. There will be predictability, and there will be ag land protection. And there will not be 1 per acre on the best land on the earth.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, we have a motion and a second to approve Macaulay Acres number 2. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. No opposed. It's unanimous. Okay. It is approved. Thank you. Way more exciting than I think some of you might have thought it might be. So we are moving on to number 2, our number 3 public hearing, actually, our second minor subdivision. This one, Confluence Minor Subdivision in East Missoula. We will also begin with staff report from Tim Worley.
Yes, this is the Confluence subdivision, a proposal for a 1-lot subdivision in East Missoula. It's located on Minnesota Avenue. It also butts up against Highway 200, this parcel does. This proposal would create a one-lot subdivision for the purpose of eventually allowing for 14 condominium units. This location is Zone CC2, which allows for residential uses, and there's a 14-unit apartment building being built here currently. To become eligible for condominiums, you have to go through the Subdivision and Platting Act, and you have to have a zone parcel. So that's why this project is here before you today. This is in the East Missoula edition, but since that was a 1909 subdivision, this parcel has not gone through the Subdivision and Platting Act, and thus subdivision review today. I should note that creation of condominiums will have to be finalized through a condominium townhouse zoning review, and the number of condos in question would require approval by the Board of Adjustment. That would be through a special exception request. So this is a subdivision review, so we assess the review criteria, including impacts to public health and safety, local services, etc. One element to note is that this is a through lot, so Minnesota Avenue runs along the southern edge of the parcel, and the northwestern edge is Highway 200, so that requires mitigation for having a street in the front and in the back. They have proposed, the applicant has proposed some trees and a buffer along the Highway 200 frontage, and we're recommending a maintenance agreement that covers the trees, actually fencing as well, and the buffer zone to be inserted in covenants or a development agreement. We're also making a recommendation for a sidewalk along the Minnesota Avenue frontage of the subdivision. This is something that was recommended by the Health Department, the Metropolitan Planning Organization, City Engineering, and County Parks. This is something that is already required anyway as part of the city's water and sewer contract. This is a copy of that contract, and I won't make you read the fine print, but essentially they have to build to urban standards for this location, including walkways as part of their water and sewer connection. So why a sidewalk? It will serve the 14 units in the subdivision. It's proportional to the need, and it connects to an existing facility, and we have some photos of that existing facility. The photo on the right-hand side shows the sidewalk, existing sidewalk that would connect to Confluence subdivision. That's looking in an east-northeast direction. And if the sidewalk were built, it would allow for a walking connection to Highway 200, which is featured in the slide on the western or the left-hand portion of the slide. And I should note that we did get one comment from an adjacent landowner, and I'll just go ahead and read it into the record. It's from Gary Berglund. He said, "Dear Casey Drayton, I'm in receipt of a request from Hoyt Homes, Inc. to subdivide a 0.57 acre parcel next to my business. The only thing I ask is for Hoyt Homes to install a privacy fence between this subdivision and Burnich, I guess it is, frame and molding. I have an existing paved area adjacent to the subdivision for the purpose of unloading semi-trucks. I fear without a privacy fence, residents of the subdivision will be using this area for parking and storing their extra cars, boats, ATV trailers, etc. This activity would hinder my operation. A fence, I think, would help to alleviate this potential conflict. Thank you, Gary Berglund." Staff's recommendation is for approval of Confluence subdivision.
Thank you, Tim. Would the applicant's representative like to make some comments? And Dale, while you're up there, maybe you could also perhaps address that one request related to the fence.
Good afternoon. For the record, Dale McCormick with PCI representing Hoyt Homes Incorporated. I want to thank Tim and Casey for their work and good communication during the subdivision review process. We're in concurrence with staff's recommended conditions of approval. We aren't asking that condition number 5, requiring a sidewalk along the Minnesota Avenue frontage, be removed, but we do find it problematic and feel it sets a bad precedent. This walkway is not required by the county subdivision regulations or the county building permit process. We agreed to waive our right to protest an RSID if a more comprehensive sidewalk project was done at some future date. And as Tim pointed out, agency comments requesting the walkway were predominantly city agencies, including city engineer, Metropolitan Planning Organization, Missoula Urban Transportation District. County Parks, Trails, and Open Lands recommended the sidewalk, but County Public Works did not. This condition is being driven by city agencies and not county policy. In terms of the fence and the comment from the neighbor, that's something that Mr. Hoyt is willing to do for the neighbor. We request your approval of the subdivision, subject to staff's recommended conditions, and be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Yeah, Dale, did you have a question? Or Dale, Josh, did you have a question?
For John, on the sidewalk issue, what sort of standing do we have there? Can we say build the sidewalk?
I think you can, yeah.
Thanks. Thanks.
Okay, this is a public hearing. It looks like most of the public cleared out, but now's your opportunity if you wanted to say anything else on this subdivision. Okay, I will close the public hearing. Tim, a question for you. So as it relates to the fence, which the property owner appears to be willing to install, is that something that we would need or ought to or even can make a condition of approval? Or do we just roll with this as a commitment of the property owner?
It just depends on your degree of comfort with what's been said. I can give you condition language that I think would work that would tie it to the filing of the plat. It's just whatever your preference is.
I'd like that.
Okay.
Dale, any objection to making it a condition of approval?
No, we don't have an objection to making it a condition of approval.
Okay, thanks.
But Tim, you'll have findings of fact to support that condition,
Yes.
I assume.
Yep.
Thank you.
And Tim, do you have that language already preemptively prepared for us, or?
I just want to make sure I have my cardinal directions correct, and maybe Dale or Wade could correct me. Privacy fencing shall be installed along the east-northeast property boundary of the subdivision, subject to CAP's review and approval prior to final plat approval. Does that sound right?
Okay. All right, any other questions or comments or a motion?
All right, I would move we approve the subdivision with the recommended addition of the fence.
Based on the
Well, the
findings of
conditions.
fact and conclusions of law.
Thanks.
Okay. Okay. Down in the staff report. Okay, I'll second that. Any further discussion on the motion to approve the Confluent subdivision? Seeing none. All in favor? Aye. No opposed. That's approved. Okay. Is there any other business to come before the commission today? Seeing none. Thanks everyone for participating, and we will be adjourned.